All good? Okay. You can non, get your seat wherever you want to be. Même si tu veux t'asseoir au milieu là, wherever you want.
Mais parce que là, il y en a qui font des côtes.
Okay. Welcome everyone. 1-0 to the first event of 2017 held by the King's College London European Society in collaboration with the Department of Political Economy. Tonight we've invited, or this afternoon, we've invited here Yanis Varoufakis, Professor of University of Athens, visiting professor here in the Department of Political Economy, former Greek finance minister, and most recently co-founder of the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025. Yanis will be discussing tonight, this afternoon, Europe's crisis and what to do about it. So without further ado, Yanis will be talking for about 45 to 50 minutes, then we'll have questions. I'll give you Yanis Varoufakis.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. It's great to be in the Anatomy Amphitheatre to become, I believe, the first speaker to dissect on behalf of the Economic Society, the European Society and the Political Economy Department, the disaster of Brexit and of the European Union. It is a complete calamity, is it not? Not so much the decision for Britain to get out of the European Union, but the way that the European Union has been dealing so inefficiently, let me put it mildly, with what was always going to be an inevitable crisis. Now, for the purposes of full disclosure, before the referendum, I campaigned in this country. I gave, I believe, 13 speeches in 13 different cities. North of England, Wales, Scotland, and so on, against Brexit, in support of what we at the Democracy in Europe movement refer to as a radical remain, or a radical in, or to put it slightly different, in this EU, against this EU. A message which was quite difficult to explain, especially in Leeds and Doncaster. Now, let me tell you what I propose to do. First, I'm going to begin with a rather controversial working hypothesis. I can tell you what it is right at the outset. Brexit is due to the euro crisis. That's my hypothesis. And then I'll try to, once stated, try to support it. Maybe this is self-serving because I want to spend the second part of the lecture discussing the euro crisis, and therefore linking it to your predicament here in Britain. And then finally, talk about the future in a positive and optimistic way, not because there is any evidence that we have to be optimistic or that we should be optimistic, but because hope is a duty for progressive political economists. Hope completely unsupported by evidence. So, allow me to begin with my working hypothesis. June referendum. What was it, 2%? That made a difference? Britain has always been a very difficult partner for the European Union, maybe for good reasons. People misquote Winston Churchill, saying that, reminding us of the fact that Winston Churchill, immediately after the war, spoke of the importance of creating a United States of Europe. But the reason why I'm saying that he's being misquoted is because they don't quote the rest of the paragraph, in which he's saying, but Britain should stay out of it. Did you know that? We are Europeans, but we're not made of the same stuff. That was the message that was coming. And so, there is a tradition in Britain. of Euroscepticism, which has to do to a very large extent with the profound differences between English capitalism, British capitalism on the one hand, and continental Germanic capitalism or Central European capitalism on the other. It also has to do with the way the European Union was put together. Let me just remind you very briefly that the first name for the European Union was a European Community of Coal and Steel. In other words, it was a cartel, just like OPEC is a cartel. Producing countries getting together in order to manipulate the price, in order to preserve a price-cost margin in the context of diminishing aggregate supply by means that are purely political and administrative. And the Brussels bureaucracy, from the very beginning, was intended as the bureaucracy of that particular cartel. That cartel then expanded. It co-opted the automakers, the chemical industry, then they co-opted the French farmers. It's called the Common Agricultural Policy. A chunk of the profits of industry, of heavy industry, were utilized in order to bribe the French farmers to keep quiet, in a sense. And that, from an Anglo-Celtic perspective, from an Adam Smith perspective, the perspective of a free marketeer, the European Union constituted the antithesis of what the British establishment always considered capitalism to be. So I'm simply alluding to this, searching into history and the history of economic thought for the beginnings of the jarring dissonance that the United Kingdom was within the European Union. But nevertheless, that 2% that made a difference in June had to do with two phenomena. One is the lack of decent jobs in large parts of England, outside London. Let's put it in 2 words, or maybe 3. Involuntary underemployment and with involuntary migration. The fact that you had hundreds of thousands of EU citizens coming to Britain, I can assure you had nothing to do with the attractions of the British weather. And everything to do with the mishandling of the Euro crisis by the European Central Bank, the European Commission, the Troika, and the Eurogroup. The reason why you had all those Portuguese, Spaniards, Greeks, Italians migrate to London and to other cities in Britain, and why the Bulgarians, leaving their country, and the Romanians, the Poles, came to Britain and did not go to France, or did not go to Italy, was because of the spectacular, colossal failures of macroeconomic management in Europe. If you didn't have what I call contractionary contraction, now George Osborne and I disagree on many things. One of those is the merits of expansionary contraction. That was, remember, his mantra, his way of selling his policy of fiscal consolidation, austerity on the one hand, at the fiscal level, with the Bank of England going berserk, printing money as if there is no tomorrow. Expansionary monetary policy, contractionary fiscal policy. We disagreed on that. Where we did not disagree was that contractionary contraction is a very idiotic idea. And this is exactly what Europe has been practicing now since 2009, immediately after the greatest shock to the financial system of Europe and the world since the 1929 collapse. That contractionary contraction is the reason why you had 2 things here in Britain. Firstly, the flow of EU migrants, which gave rise, as every deflationary period does, to scapegoating of the other, the foreigner, the intruder coming from outside, and the fact that despite quantitative easing practiced by the Bank of England, the bank printing that I just referred to, that was not enough to restore the level of investment in physical capital in Britain to any kind of level consistent with the creation of decent jobs in this country, outside very small areas, like London, for instance. I do not know whether you care for numbers and whether you search for them and you look at them, but it is a fact that investment in physical capital in Britain today is the lowest it has been as a percentage of GDP since 1950. You only have to state that in order to realize some of the important elements of this crisis, this political crisis and this economic crisis. You read the newspapers today, there is celebration of the fact that the economy of Britain has been growing quite fast, and 2% is very fast by comparison to Europe these days, continental Europe, as well as with other parts of the world. But of course it's all due to consumption. Consumption which is based on credit. And with a current account deficit in this country of 6%, which is grossly, or ought to be, grossly unsustainable. So all this money printing did not do anything to alleviate the great imbalance between savings and investment in this country. Now that is a problem which we can only understand in exactly the same way that the Green Movement understands climate change. You cannot understand climate change by focusing just on the policies of the United Kingdom. Climate change is a global phenomenon. The solution must be a global solution, and the way we understand it must be global. The same thing applies to this incongruity, to this disconnect between savings and investment. My estimation is that as we speak, in Britain you have around 800 to 900 billion pounds of idle cash. That is savings sitting in the City of London gathering dust, not being invested in production, in physical capital, in productive processes. It's not completely idle, it is slashing around, bidding up asset prices, house prices, equities and so on, but it is not being invested. And as long as you have this disconnect, it doesn't matter how much credit you create in order to bolster the bankers, middle class, families, house prices, and so on and so forth, you are not going to create the decent jobs in the north of England which are necessary in order to make the northern powerhouse a reality, in order to make people there feel less discarded than they feel today. The failure to utilize the Bank of England's money printing exercise, also known as quantitative easing, is certainly connected to the failures of continental Europe. The British economy is so intertwined with the European economy, both at the level of finance, services, as well as, of course, physical goods, that, to be fair to George Osborne and the Tory government, it is extremely difficult for any London-based government to solve the problem of excess savings when Europe is moving in precisely the opposite way. Take Germany. Germany has an even greater disconnect between savings and investment. It also has the lowest level of investment in its history since the end of the Second World War. And the tragedy is that if you look at the Eurozone as a single macroeconomy, this disconnect, the difference between savings and investment, is getting bigger, not smaller. This is why, even though I do not believe that anyone can accuse me of being a lackey of Brussels or a cheerleader of the European Commission, I can assure you they dislike me intensely. This is why I was campaigning in Britain against Brexit. Because the real causes of the discontent in North England, in the coastal towns of England, in the parts of this country which consider themselves to have been abandoned by the establishment, the real cause of the discontent is not legislation by Brussels on the size of milk cartons. That is something drummed up by the Daily Mail and the Express. The real reason is that sense of having been abandoned first by Thatcherism and secondly by the post-Thatcher insurgency of a neoliberal regime that lost interest even in legitimizing its rule over this country. So the major question that I think we need to address from a British perspective is if the true causes of discontent have little to do with actual membership of the European Union. That's the first if. The second if I am right to say that the European Union has failed to address a crisis that was inevitable and which was hardwired in its own DNA, what should the next step be for Britain? Now, it is absolutely imperative that those of us, I do not necessarily count you, but I'm talking about myself and my colleagues, Team 25, friends and so on, who consider ourselves to be Europeanists, it's absolutely imperative that we avoid the sinister error of treating those who voted for Brexit as buffoons, as racists, as xenophobes, as populists, who do not really have the right to be making decisions on behalf of the British people. This is a gross error. We need to engage with those who correctly identified the great problem of Europe, of the European Union, which is this combination of failed policies and authoritarianism, the lack of democracy. We need to engage properly with the arguments in favor of democratic sovereignty. It is completely true that when you create a single market without creating an overarching democratically sovereign parliament, you are asking for major political trouble, because essentially it is as if you are declaring that democracy is a luxury to be afforded only to the ruling class or to the surplus nations and not to the deficit nations. And we need to answer the question, how do we deal with the major undercurrents that led us to Brexit? Which, if I'm correct in my analysis, have to do with involuntary underemployment. I'm not talking about the underemployment of the rich and famous who choose to be underemployed, or the royal family for that matter. I'm talking about those who would like a decent job and can't get one. And the only way of getting one is by moving to London, whether they live in Doncaster or in Sofia, Bulgaria. So how do we deal with these problems? Because you see, Theresa May has a major catastrophe heading her way. She's now riding this bandwagon, if you want, of Brexit, which she was not part of, because up until the 23rd of June, if I'm not mistaken, she was campaigning, not very feverishly, in favor of Remain. And now she's utilizing this dynamic that Brexit has created. And she's doing it quite well. Of course, you know, our side of politics is aiding and abetting her by simply being absent. But nevertheless, this is going to run out of power. It's going to run out of steam. Because when Brexit becomes established, it will take some time, because as I keep saying, you can check out anytime you like from the European Union, but it's not very easy to leave. This is a line from an old song. The discontent is not going to go away, because those who voted for Brexit, hoping that this would be a wake-up call for the ruling class in London, will realize that it wasn't. And they will realize that the promise of Brexit is not going to bring jobs to Leeds, it's not going to bring jobs to parts of this country that desperately need them. And then what happens? Then, I submitted to you, we're running a very, very, very serious risk of fascism. And by fascism, I do not mean to invoke some nasty word or some swear word. When I say, for instance, and I do say that, and it doesn't make me very popular in the United States, that Donald Trump is a fascist, I'm not saying this to denigrate him. I'm not saying this in order to badmouth him. I mean it analytically. Let me remind you of a gentleman called Benito Mussolini. Now, I don't know whether you've seen any of the ancient reels of him speaking, very Trump-like. But, speaking about policies, do you know what the first piece of legislation he introduced the moment he took power? I'll tell you. Protections, tariffs. What was the second piece of legislation that he introduced? He introduced minimum wages. The first minimum wage to be introduced in Europe was introduced by Mussolini. The third bit that he introduced was social security. The welfare state was not created by the ugly government, it was created by, I was going to say Berlusconi, by Mussolini. That's Donald Trump. Do you know what the first thing he did, the first people he met when he became president the other day? I didn't know that. It was not publicized in the media. I know this because one of the people who was in the room called me to tell me. The president of the Auto Workers Union, Donald Trump, met the leaders of the American trade unions. They had not seen an American president for 40 years. Donald Trump saw them. And you know what his message was? You were right. Your wages and conditions have been falling for far too long. And I need to help you. And you need to help me, and we'll help each other. Mussolini. Mussolini's strategy was one of creating a dictatorial, authoritarian state where the class war would be regulated by the fascist party. The working class would be given social security, minimum wages, minimum protections, a kind of patriarchal, and when I say the working class, I mean the men, a patriarchal kind of shield provided by the fascist state in exchange for what? Doing as they are told. Not contesting employers and creating a compact with the fascist government and the capitalist class against neighboring countries. That's Mussolini. Now, when I say Trump is Mussolini, in a postmodern version, I'll tell you there is one difference between them, which thankfully exists, but I'll come to it in a moment. I'm not doing it in order to denigrate him. I'm trying to explain to you what the danger is for Britain. Because, personally, I think Theresa May is a fine woman. Indeed, I was peeved some time ago, a few weeks ago, when she copied an industrial policy paper that 2 or 3 of us had written on behalf of John McDonnell. You know, this whole business about industry policy. It was plagiarized from us. She even used the same terminology, patient capital. When I saw that, I thought, oh my God. So, she's perfectly all right. But she's making promises to the people who voted Brexit that she cannot fulfill. She's a goner. She doesn't have much time left. Because these expectations are incredibly powerful now. This is the feeling I get when I travel around England. At the moment, those who have them and who are motivated by them and are agitated are expending their energy making sure that Brexit happens and it happens quickly and we get our country back and all that. Yeah? But soon after Brexit is completed, where are they going to turn to? Because the real cause of their anger is not Brussels. It's the lack of decent jobs, services, social housing, health, education, and dignity in their own communities. And that will never happen without a New Deal. A New Deal, I mean it in the sense of Franklin Roosevelt, of a state intervention, a public intervention to take the idle mountains of cash and energize them in investments, both in productive, innovative technologies and in the maintainers. Because our society has a tendency to be biased in favor of the innovators. We forget the maintainers, the people who keep society going, the ones who provide care, the nurses, the people who fix the sewers. It's not rocket science, it's not digital technologies, but without it we are all dead. And if these expectations are frustrated, it will be very, very easy for a Donald Trump, a genuine Donald Trump, to emerge in this country. And remember, Brexit was predicated upon a major fallacy that both sides of the debate, the Brexiteers and the Remainers, committed or were subject to. The fallacy that most people in Britain have it's very, very good not to be running for election in this country, so I can speak this way. But most of the people in this country, of course none of you in here, live under the illusion that the European Union is a given. It's out there. And it's like a club. Do I want to be a member of this club or not? And some people say, yes, I want to be a member of this club. Other people say, you must be joking. I pay my dues, my fees, and what do I get from it? Nothing. But it is not a given. It is not constant. It is not immutable. It is a major system of politics, of economics, of culture that is at an advanced stage of disintegration. Brexit is speeding up this disintegration. Don't take seriously those who say to you that, Brexit was a wake-up call for Brussels, and Brussels now are going to start behaving better towards European peoples, and they're going to democratize and abandon failed policies and do that which they have not done in previous years. Well, let me remind you what happened after Brexit. The leaders, our great and good leaders, got together in Bratislava, in Slovakia, and they boarded a beautiful riverboat. And they had a 2-day discussion about creating a common army. What? It's exactly what Europe was missing. And you know what? 3 days later, Merkel, Hollande, and Renzi met again to have a meeting only amongst the three, Germany, France, Italy, to discuss further their plans for saving Europe after Brexit. And they actually said that. They had the temerity to say, we're getting together to discuss how to solidify Europe after Brexit. And interestingly, they met in the Mediterranean on an Italian aircraft carrier. I didn't know that Italy had an aircraft carrier. And I wonder, why does Italy need an aircraft carrier? Anyway, that's besides the point. And what did they discuss on the aircraft carrier? The EU-Turkey treaty deal for returning refugees from the Greek islands to Turkey. So, please do not entertain any false hopes that Brexit is going to cause the European Union to get serious about solidifying, integrating, and bolstering the European Union. It is not happening. So, remember, there are primary effects and secondary effects to everything we do. The primary effect of Brexit will be that Britain is now going to enter, instead of going global, the whole of Whitehall and Westminster, they're going to be engaged for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years with Brexit negotiations, which is not exactly what was promised for being extroverted and going to China and in India and creating new links between Britain and the rest of the world. This is a primary. bad enough, but it's not the worst part. The secondary effect of Brexit is what is mostly detrimental. Because if I am right in saying that the European Union disintegration is going to speed up as a result of Brexit, and if I'm also right in saying, there are many conditions here, conditionalities to my argument, and if I'm also right in saying that the European Union disintegration is going to strengthen the deflationary forces in the continent, which make it more difficult for the government in this country to carry out an industry policy, to bring investment up to scratch, and therefore to address the concerns of those who voted for Brexit, then you can see that the secondary effects are far more worrisome than the primary effects. This is why, to those who say to me, oh my goodness, we're out of the European Union, why does your movement, DiEM, why are you interested in us? We're out of the European Union. You're not out. And in the end, who cares about the official borders of the European Union? We are in this mess together, whether you voted to get out or not. The way that Britain is going to negotiate Brexit, the interim agreement that Theresa May announced as one of her goals in Parliament the other day, what will it look like? That will have a profound impact on the future of Europe and the future of Britain. And it is too important to leave to the Department for Brexit, which sounds a bit like a Monty Python-esque department, or Funny Walks or something, staffed by people that Theresa May is putting there because she knows they're incompetent and she wants to expose their incompetence in order to get rid of them. This is a tragedy for all of us. Do you believe that David Davis has a clue? I don't. Don't say I said that. So let me now address some ideas. Address the question of what needs to be done. The last part of my lecture today has been connected with this Democracy in Europe movement. We are an assorted lot of people from across Europe who are bound together by some basic common judgments. The first one is that, yes, this European Union, can I use a term that President Obama conveyed to me in person? A very unpresidential term. The European Union sucks. He was right. And yet, its disintegration is going to make life much more brutish and unpleasant for all of us. That's the first conviction that we share. The second conviction we share is that the European Union cannot be reformed gradually. Think of David Cameron's attempts to reform it. He went to Brussels, and he went to Berlin, and he went to Paris with a list of things he wanted. They heard him, they said, no. Yeah? Gradualism works in many realms. It will not work in the European Union. It will not work because the European Union is in such an advanced stage of crisis that we need drastic changes. But this is the third conviction that we at DiEM are sharing. Drastic does not necessarily mean revolutionary. Because if I were to stand here in front of you and say, we need a revolution in Europe, you would have every reason to leave this room angry that you wasted an hour with me, and disappointed that it's all futile. Because we can't have a revolution in Europe. But we can have drastic changes. And I need to be very specific about this now. What kind of changes could we have? And once I start unfolding this answer, then I will reconnect it to Britain, and then we can have our discussion. Yeah. So I'll give you just a few examples of things that can be done in Europe tomorrow morning. As you know, we have quantitative easing. We got it very late, years after you started it here, but when you were finishing it, we were beginning it. Because as you know, Mrs. Merkel follows the dictum, never do something today if you can postpone it for next year. So we still have quantitative easing. This means that around 60 billion euros is being printed every month by Mario Draghi, who is forced by the awful charter of the European Central Bank, over which he presides, to use the 60 billion to buy primarily German government debt, then French government debt, after that Italian government debt, Spanish government debt, and then Portuguese and Irish. A few pennies of Portuguese and Irish. Yeah? Most of it goes to buy German debt. Now, why buy German debt? Germany doesn't have a debt problem. Germany indeed has bonds that enjoy, in inverted commas, negative yields. People pay Wolfgang Schäuble for him to borrow from them. The price of money has become negative. That's indicative of how deep the crisis is. Usually, things that have a negative price are bads. They're not goods. They're things you want to get rid of. You have toxic waste, you pay somebody to take it. That's a negative price. Why would anyone accept a negative price for their money? The answer, of course, is this major disconnect between savings and investment. Savings is the price, the supply of money, and investment is the demand for money. When supply exceeds demand, the price falls. What's the price of money? The rate of interest. But the tragedy with the money market, as Keynes was not the first, but amongst the first to note, is that it doesn't work like potatoes. If you have excess supply of potatoes, the price of potatoes will fall. And then eventually the excess supplies will be eradicated because people will buy more and producers will produce less. But with money, that is not the case. Because when the price of money comes down, demand for investment funds is not going up because employers, investors, instead of seeing that the price of money comes down and thinking, oh, that's good, I'll invest more, they think, oh my God, for Mario Draghi to be pushing interest rates so low, things are bad, I'm not investing. So the money market fades. The price falls, but the excess supply gets worse. And this is why you have negative interest rates in Germany. What is the effect of this? The rise of fascism. Have you heard of the Alternative für Deutschland? It's a very nasty party. Give me Trump anytime compared to that. Yeah? They went from 0% to 15% in opinion polls in the last 8 months. And 15% is a lot, especially in a country with proportional representation. I'm not saying they will win government, but this is an indication of the ill effects of this particular quantitative easing. And so why is Mario Draghi using most of the money that he prints to buy German bonds, German debt, when this is bad for Germany? Well, because the German central bank doesn't let him buy Italian debt unless he buys more German debt. And why doesn't he let him do that? Because the German central bank would like him to buy no debt, but has to accept a ruling of the European Court of Justice, the European Court, that determined that Draghi has the right to buy debt as long as he buys in proportion to the size of the economy. So he buys more German debt. Why am I saying that? Because this is clear madness. What's going on? Could we change this? Do we need a revolution? Do we need to storm the Winter Palaces in order to change? No. All you need is a press conference. A press conference in which we announce that as of tomorrow, Mario Draghi will not be buying government debt. He will be buying the bonds of the European Investment Bank. The European Investment Bank is based in Luxembourg. It belongs to you. What? Still. You're still in the European Union. It belongs to us Greeks. It belongs to all of us. It's the only bank, the only thing we own in common in Europe is the European Investment Bank. It's three times the size of the World Bank. And it's a very good record. It issues bonds. It can issue a lot more of those in order to take the idle cash which is sitting in the city of London, in Frankfurt, in Paris, even in Wall Street and Beijing, and plow it into, let's say, research and development in green energy in Britain, or in Italy, or in Greece, and therefore bring up investment and stabilize the political economy of Europe. What stops them from doing that? Nothing. This is completely legal, by the way. Even the Central Bank of Germany would not object to it, because Draghi has every right, according to his charter, to purchase the bonds of a bank. He doesn't have the right to purchase the bonds of a government. So this is, I'm just using this as a small example, a tiny little example. But imagine if we had 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 such policies that could be effective tomorrow morning. And knowing that only political will prevents it from being effective. It's not a legal problem. You don't need to change property rights. You do not need to take the property of the rich. You don't need an October Revolution for that. It's a small tweak to an existing system. But this is why it's so radical, because it would make such a large change when politically it's so easy to do. And yet it's not being done. We can discuss it as to why it's not being done. But what we at DiEM are trying to do is to identify these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 policies that would make a huge difference tomorrow. It's not that we are inane enough to think that because we will have identified them, the power of reason will cause Wolfgang Schäuble to roll over in the Eurogroup and say, DiEM 25 put forward these proposals, I've got to say yes. Of course not. He will threaten, he will kick, and he will scream the way he does. But this set of proposals, which by the way we have entitled the European New Deal, it's our policy paper, which is going to be unveiled in summary form on the 9th of February and in complete form by the end of February, and then will be launched formally in a large event that we're organizing in Rome on the 25th of March, which is not just Greece's National Day, but it is also the anniversary of the Treaty of Rome. It's the 60 years, the birthday of the European Union, assuming that it's still alive by the 25th of March. The reason why we're doing it is very simple. The worst enemy of progressive politics is TINA, the dogma that there is no alternative. Most people, even those who more or less disagree with the establishment, deep down fear that maybe there isn't an alternative. Maybe the government is doing what it's doing because there is no alternative. Maybe it would be nice to be able to imagine a revolution and a different world where we are all tall, blonde, Swedish, blue-eyed and all that, but it's not realistic. This syndrome of TINA is what allows an inane establishment to continue being in denial and gives rise to what is mistakenly referred to as populism. I call it crypto-fascism or fascism. To dissolve TINA, you need to be able to go out there on the street and in the pub convince people, before they've had too much to drink, that, look, these are things we could do tomorrow. And if you manage to convince them that we could do those things tomorrow, then suddenly the question arises in their mind, so why are we not doing it? And then you can have righteous anger against the establishment for not doing things that would be good for all of us in Europe. How does this blend in with Brexit? Well, it doesn't really matter whether Britain is inside the European Union or not, inside the customs union or not, inside the single market or not. You are inside Europe, and you'll always be part of Europe, and Europe needs you just as much as you need Europe. These problems of investment, of decent jobs, of recalibrating the financial system. One of our proposals has to do with creating a digital public banking system with zero or minuscule bureaucracy for public purpose throughout Europe in order to channel payments through a public system at no cost to the public, no profits for the banking sector, allowing governments to generate another source of income, which can then be invested in providing things like guaranteed jobs inside the communities, remuneration for people who are caring for the community, who already do the job, but without anyone helping them do the job, which is necessary to keep communities alive. This righteous anger that can only come from policies that can be implemented tomorrow without revolutionary change is the only foundation for building an alternative to this fake contradiction, this fake clash between a clueless establishment and the nationalist international of Farage, of Le Pen, of the AfD, of Trump, and so on. And I say this is I'm referring to it as a false contradiction, as a false clash. Because in the end, they are each other's accomplices. The establishment needs Farage, the establishment needs Le Pen, the establishment needs the AfD, because they are the only raison d'etre that they've got left. Vote for us, because otherwise Le Pen will come in. Follow the French election. You see that this is the line being followed by Fillon. No one in their right mind would ever vote for Fillon. The only reason why one could vote for Fillon, reasonably, is to keep Le Pen out. So the establishment needs these people. And those people need the establishment because their existence is predicated upon the failures of the establishment. So that's what we're trying to do with DiEM. To reach out across national borders and across political party divides to create the only thing that can oppose the nationalist international on the one hand and the inane establishment on the other. And that is a progressive international. Thank you. Well, before I take questions, let me plug an event that we have tomorrow at Conway Hall at 10 o'clock. This is DiEM getting together. Lots of DiEMers from across the United Kingdom, from Scotland, from Manchester, from various places, from the north of England, are coming down to Conway Hall at 10 o'clock. There will be 2 or 3 short introductions by members of the coordinating committee of DiEM, and then we'll just talk about what needs to be done. End of plug. 10 a.m. It's working, a working meeting. It's not going to be glamorous. Okay.
Thank you, Yanis. How much time do you have?
I need, what's time now? 5:30?
5:30.
Is it 5:30? Yeah. Oh, I've got plenty of time. I need to be out of here by 6:15, 6:20.
Unfortunately, we don't have a mic, so you'll have to speak quite loud. But
I do.
that's fine. You don't give me.
Oh, all right.
Everybody else. Who has questions? I'll take 3 at a time. 3 at a time? Is that okay? Yeah.
It's up to you. You run this segment.
All right.
Something on the galvanization is quite interesting. When you were talking about creation of jobs as one of the possible solutions to the crisis, the quality of the job as we should think of is kind of obsolete in a way because of technology and AI taking over jobs that are
going to pubs, maybe not literally, to talk to people about this kind of thing. How can we convey the message, particularly about the ECB quantitative easing program, to the ordinary person without subjecting them to jargon and complicated messages?
Okay. Excellent questions. Look, on the rise of the machines, yeah? That's the first question you asked. It's a huge problem. There is no doubt that we are facing a singularity. The moment when, for the first time since the steam engine, more jobs are being destroyed by technology than are being created. But the reason why we're in crisis now is not that. The reason why we're in crisis is because of the model of financialization that started in the late 70s and which blew up in 2008. And then in 2008, our great and good leaders decided that the weakest and the poorest should shoulder the burdens created by the collapsed financial bubbles. And the result was a combination of austerity with money printing, which refloated finance, but did not create circumstances for recovery. Underneath that, there is an undercurrent there, which is the one you're putting forward. We haven't reached the stage yet where the rise of the machines is a cause of a crisis, but we're getting there very quickly. So, allow me to just put it briefly by saying that we are going very soon to find ourselves at a juncture. And this is an allegory, a metaphor, or actually a couple of metaphors that I use. Very soon, most jobs will be doable by machines. Most jobs. Yeah. Already we have white-collar workers that are losing their job, especially the legal profession, medical profession, and so on, to the machines. So, imagine in science fiction terms, just for a moment, that machines will be able to be our slaves. Now the question is, who owns the machines and their product, the wealth that they create? So it's a political issue, it's not a technical issue. And the juncture that I was referring to will either take us towards a situation very much like Star Trek, where everybody's sitting down around doing nothing, exploring the universe and having philosophical conversations with the Vulcan. And, food is produced by a hole in the wall. And no one works, there is no money, because there is abundance. Either we can move in that direction. Okay, this is a limit case, but it's moving in that direction. Which is effectively communism. Communism without the KGB and the Gulag. Or alternatively, you move towards a dystopia, a bit like the Matrix, where the machines have taken over and we are their slaves. But let's add a Keynesian perspective to this. The destruction of so many jobs is going to create greater tensions due to the diminution of aggregate demand. And unless there is a way of sharing returns to capital, the crisis is simply going to get worse. Even if we overcome this one by means of smart policies like the ones that at DiEM we're trying to imagine. So I've been an advocate of what I refer to as a universal basic dividend, which is not the same thing as a universal basic income. And the difference is that whereas a universal basic income is to be funded from taxation, which I oppose, and I oppose it because then there would be a tension between welfare payments and the universal basic income. I think that, to give you a very simple example, every time there's an IPO, initially we can begin with 10% of shares going into a trust fund, a public trust fund, and the dividends funding a universal basic dividend. That kind of thinking. Okay, that was the first question. The second question was modern technology, you see. It's died on me. Okay, how do we incentivize, I can't stand this verb, it's not a verb, the elites in Berlin and in the remaining of the Federal Republic to change course. Effectively, that's what you're saying. Look, they don't want negative interest rates on their pools. We don't have to convince them of that. They hate it. You know, Wolfgang Schäuble, the federal finance minister of Germany, is very worried about it. They would like them to be small but positive. The fact that they are negative has to do with the euro crisis. But I think that the real question is, how do you convince Germany to behave like a hegemonic country? Now, this sounds a bit strange coming from a Greek. That I don't think that, you know, that I lament the fact that Germany is not hegemonic enough. But I do. You see, there is an important difference to be made between being authoritarian and being hegemonic. At the moment, Berlin is authoritarian. They have one word which they keep, actually two words. One is nine, and the other one is rules. The rules. You have tried to have a discussion with them about the rules, whether they are smart, efficient, whether we should change them, whether they can be applied for the benefit of citizenry, and the response we get, but these are the rules. Yes, I know these are the rules. Should these be the rules? Can we implement these rules? But these are the rules. You know, that is, how do we overcome this? That's the right question. Yeah? To put it slightly differently, the same question, to rephrase it, how do we convince Germany that it is macroeconomically significant? Germany doesn't understand it. And it is America's fault. I blame the Americans for that. Because from 1947 to 2008, the United States has been managing global aggregate demand, one way or the other. In a particular way during the Bretton Woods era, in a completely different way, much more chaotically, after the mid-1970s. But nevertheless, they were the ones, Washington DC, that was managing aggregate demand so Germany could treat itself as a factory that doesn't have to worry about demand for its products, it had to worry only about making them well. And they do make them well. But at some point, you've got to realize, this is one of the things that I was trying to explain, and I was being accused of the hideous crime of talking macroeconomics to finance ministers, that if you constantly have an 8%, 8.5% was last week, of a current account surplus, this means, it's simple arithmetic, it's not rocket science, that every year you bring much more money into the country than goes out of the country. Now that's somebody else's money. Yeah? Every time you sell a Mercedes-Benz to an Italian, you amass capital, monies, in a Frankfurt bank. But that's a liability of Italian customers. So the flip side of your current account surplus is the fact that you have increasingly to invest your savings as a German in other people's countries. So you effectively become a slave to the kind of management that other countries are utilizing domestically. And the problem with this is that at some point, if their liabilities start rising or continue to rise at the rate that your assets are rising, at some point they won't be able to repay you. And then you lose your savings. So it's not in your interest to maintain such a large current account surplus. And therefore, it is much more sensible and in the interest of Germany and all surplus countries to participate in what I refer to as a surplus recycling mechanism, where the surpluses of the surplus country are invested productively in the deficit countries in order to keep the whole thing going. It's an ecological principle, it's recycling. So that is the serious question. How do we convince them of that? The answer is, I have no idea. Your question about how do you explain something as complicated as the ECB's quantitative easing operation, where it buys EIB bonds for the purposes of energizing and activating idle savings and putting them into investment. This is our task. Unless we manage to make this bite-sized, digestible, and as easy for people to understand as let's get our country back, we've failed. It is possible. Most people know, they've read it somewhere, they've heard it, that the Bank of England is printing lots of money. You know, you can use the Socratic method. You can ask questions. Do you know what they do with this money? To your interlocutor. They say, You say, you know, they buy mortgages and they push house prices up and you can't get a house. You say, yeah, they do that. Sorry. And then you say, wouldn't it be better if they took this money and gave it to a company to produce good stuff and hire your son or daughter? Then they got it. But we have to be inventive in this. We have to make it intelligible. And you see, if we can't make it intelligible, this is something that we teachers know. If we can't make it intelligible to an audience that does not have a lot of experience in the particular subject, it means we do not understand it.
Thank you very much. I think in Greece you have the moment actually to stand up to German order liberalism, but Tsipras chose not to do so. And basically, probably he didn't do it because he's a closet order liberal, but because there was something that made him not want to go through what it would have meant. There must have been some reason for that. So, and I think that made many people very, because there was a kind of hope for many on the left with what was happening in Greece, but the choices made by the government, which I perfectly understand as well, kind of killed, I think, a lot of hope. So how would you actually convince people that it is possible to practice what you preach once you achieve government power?
Thank you very much for your speech. You mentioned that the ECB isn't buying up unstable bonds like the Greek bonds, or buying few of them, such as they do with the Portuguese and Irish bonds. Yeah. What would be your suggestion to remove Greece from this economic downfall due to lack of investment, due to missing confidence? You mentioned the European Investment Bank, but if there is very high bond yield and hence very high risk, how is this going to lead to investment in those countries who need it the most?
Thank you for your insightful and exciting talk. I was interested to hear you mention John McDonnell, I think, in your talk, probably in a minority in this room, judging by most people's point of view at the moment. But I have a lot of sympathy and respect for, I have respect for Jeremy Corbyn and what he's trying to do. A lot of the messages that you're talking about, I think, you might correct me, but I think he's talking about too. You spoke about a New Deal, supporting the maintainers rather than just the innovators. Again, that's something that I think he's talking about a lot. So my question is, why does it not seem to be working for him? Why is he not tapping into the North effectively? I've heard loads of answers on this. Most of them I think have been incomplete or unsatisfactory. I'd be interested to hear your answer. Thank you.
Question number one. I'm not going to speculate as to what was going on in the heart and mind of my former Prime Minister, colleague and friend, Alexis Tsipras. You must understand that, given that I resigned in anger, I clearly didn't think much of the decision he made on the night of that referendum. I clearly thought that it was the wrong choice and that we had to stick to our guns and do that which we said we were going to do. I have to, for the benefit of fairness, tell you that he was in a very tight spot. Well, one has to acknowledge that. Remember, this is a country in free fall, had been since 2009, since 2010. A lot of suffering, and the response of the Eurogroup, of the creditors, to our proposals, and I'll come back to our proposals because somebody asked me as to what I proposed, was what I refer to as the Swedish national anthem tactic. When I was presenting our proposals on how to help Greece recover, which were quite moderate, quite technical, you can read. As I was speaking, and especially when I finished, I felt as if I had just sung the Swedish national anthem. In other words, no engagement. No one, not one person, had the courtesy of telling me that I was wrong, that the proposals were mistaken, that this particular proposal was wrong for that reason. No engagement. It is as if I had sung the Swedish national anthem. Yeah? That's important for you to know. You asked me how can we convince electorates, voters, that we mean business if Tsipras does what he did on the night of the 5th of July. The answer is, well, why focus on what he did? Some of us resigned. We gave up our ministries, our position in parliament. Why? In order to indicate that there is a way of doing politics different. So that's, we need more resignations. Now, you asked me about Greece and what could we do. Look, take a look at this proposal. It's only about 30 pages. It's not much. You're students. You're supposed to be studious and to read stuff. But let me give you an answer to the European Investment Bank situation. As a finance minister, I was a governor of the European Investment Bank. So I was there in the board of directors, and I put forward this proposal. Now, the president, the chair of the European Investment Bank, was Werner Hoyer at the time, a German. He agreed completely. He was enthusiastic. He was extremely positive. A very, very nice man, I have to say, as well. Not only because he agreed, independently. You know, directors from the EIB came to Athens, came to my office, who planned this whole thing. It wouldn't be a problem because, you see, the beauty about the EIB is that when the EIB invests in a project in Congo or in the Peloponnese or wherever, it's got nothing to do with the state. The state is not borrowing money. The EIB is borrowing money. The EIB has a AAA rating from all the credit rating agencies. So today, it's got negative interest rates. People give money to the EIB in order to borrow it and fund projects like projects in Greece. So the yields would be negative. And if we went along with, and Werner Hoyer agreed with this proposal that since the European Central Bank was not buying Greek debt because Greece was sequestered, stigmatized, we were, you know, sort of put into a corner and, you know, left there to die. Since the ECB was not buying them, why not have an agreement with the EIB that the EIB issues a special bond for Greece at very low rates, and if the yield starts going above zero, then the ECB can buy some of them to push it down. We were in complete agreement on this. This is what makes me mad, that the solutions were there, they could be agreed to in a week, they could be implemented, the problem would be finished. The reason why it didn't happen was because our government was overthrown. And how were we overthrown? By closing our banks down. And why was this the case? Do they have something against Greece? No, I don't believe in conspiracies. It's really very simple. From the perspective of the Christian Democrat government in Germany, what matters is one country, France. France. Wolfgang Schäuble, Angela Merkel do not want the French elites, the French government, the French political class to become uppity, to start getting ideas again, like the ones that they had in the early 1990s, that they would take over the Bundesbank. Yeah? So, they say, you know how I know what I'm going to tell you? Because they told me. Because Schäuble told me. Yeah? He said to me, how can I let you off the hook when the French are going to take this as a sign of weakness on my behalf? Yeah? So it's a sequence. There was an election happening in Spain soon after my negotiation with them. There was an election happening in Portugal, and an election happening in Ireland, eventually in France, now, coming up. Sequential, it was for them. They thought that if they let us off the hook, then the Spaniards would probably vote for a Podemos government that would oppose Berlin, would say no to Berlin, and that would be a disaster because then the French might get the idea that they can elect a government that says no to Berlin. So we were collateral damage. It's really very simple. It's 19th century gunboat diplomacy.
Why is that so bad to just turn on Germany?
Pardon?
Why is it so bad to turn on Germany? I mean,
To turn on Germany?
I mean, you mentioned.
I didn't
that
ask.
the
I don't want anyone to turn on Germany. I want Germany to be a responsible hegemon.
But you mentioned that the Podemos would turn on Germany and then.
No. Podemos would win on the basis of an economic policy that would end austerity and therefore send a finance minister like me in the Eurogroup to contradiction.
Yeah.
So that's not turning on Germany. They just wanted to control completely the Eurogroup. It's very simple. I think I've answered. Next. Oh, the Corbyn question. Sorry. Look, again, for the benefits of full disclosure, I'm a friend of John McDonnell, I'm close to Jeremy, so I'm not an unbiased, impartial spectator of this conversation. We're together on this. But let me say that I have my criticism of some of the things that Corbyn has done or hasn't done. But allow me to put it very, very simply. In any country in the world, if someone was elected to lead a major party when 3/4 of the parliamentary party hated him and did everything they did to undermine him, it's not looking good. You know, if JFK had that, if the most charismatic leader had 3/4 of his own parliamentary party trying to destroy him, he's the real enemy for them, not Theresa May. So you have to take this into consideration.
Is there any hope?
Oh, there's always hope. Remember who's president of the United States now? Was there any hope for him a year ago?
Can and should Europe maintain a common currency?
Yes, we can, but only if we do things very differently. If we don't do things very differently, it doesn't matter whether we should or should not. It's not an ethical question. It will simply crumble.
Hi Yanis, my name is Dimitri. Last time I heard you, I was at the University of Sydney in Australia. Thank you.
Travel.
And so do I. My question is, with the rise of Donald Trump and I guess in protectionist rhetoric, if that experiment that's happening in the US now bears some fruit, and then the rest of the European countries that are thinking or like that are shaking like the Netherlands, like Italy, Spain, Greece even, see that experiment worked there or there was some form of domestic growth or prosperity. So what effect would that have as to other nations following and creating more populism that is currently brewing? Like, would that have an effect where all the EU hegemons would change their mind and adopt a more drastic change, or do you see that happening or likely to take too slow?
Look, to be honest with you, I don't know what the answer to the question is.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why my mind refuses to go that far is the fear that Trump will be successful for a short space of time. And why is this a fear? Because he's talking about a New Deal kind of infrastructural spending spree, which is fine by me, except that he wants to combine it with tax cuts in a country whose federal budget, as we speak, is already funding every single dollar spent on infrastructure and research and development with deficits. So the Keynesian idea is that when things are normal, you're running a balanced budget more or less. when you enter into a recession, you use deficit spending to boost investment. Since Reagan, at least since Reagan, the United States federal government is running a heavy deficit in order to cover up for the fact that the Reagan-Bush tax cuts depleted the tax base. So if now he starts spending considerable amounts of money, the amounts of money which is necessary to create the jobs that he's promised blue-collar workers and so on, and does two other things at the same time, reduces taxes for the rich, and starts a trade war against China, pushing China to revalue the renminbi when the renminbi should be devalued, given the credit bubble in China. This is going to break the bubble of China, and it is a huge bubble in China. And if that happens, then just consider this. We will have had a year of growth under Trump. Great expectations will have been cultivated in America and outside. But at some point, interest rates in America will balloon for two reasons. Firstly, because of local inflation, Janet Yellen increasing interest rates and for endogenous purposes, but primarily because the Chinese will start selling a lot of treasuries to try to make up for the fact that they are having a major crisis. And so demand and supply will be moving towards boosting the cost of rolling over America's federal debt at the time when it is ballooning. And what do I fear that will happen then? This will be when the midterms are coming up again in the United States. And what I fear is that Trump will slam on the brakes, and we will have a period of debt-fueled growth, followed by a sudden Austerian turn, which will be precisely what the global economy does not need.
I was wondering, what's your opinion about Scotland's case leaving the UK and joining the European Union? Do you think that's a vital case? And if so, would a country like Spain, for example, accept that?
Let me say, firstly, this is a matter for the Scots. As a Democrat, I believe that this is something that the people of a country, of a region, should be deciding for reasons that go well beyond the economic, cultural reasons, political reasons, reasons that have to do with their own identity. So, you know, when I'm in Barcelona and they ask me similar questions about Catalonia, this is the answer I give. Now, when the referendum, the Scottish referendum, was happening, during the period before the Scottish referendum, I participated a little bit in the debate. I had discussions with the SNP, and what I said to them was that it was suicidal politically to be asking for independence, but at the same time demanding the right to use the pound. That this is just not compute. If you want independence, float the Scottish pound. You have Scottish pound. If we only had the degree of monetary independence that Scotland does in Greece when I was finance minister, we wouldn't have a problem. Because remember, when you're in Scotland, you have Clydesdale Bank and Bank of Scotland notes in your pocket, right? London taxi drivers don't like it. Yeah. And this is hugely important, because all you need to do is simply cut the peg between the English pound and the Scottish pound. So if Scotland wants independence, they've got to bite the bullet. They must have monetary independence as well, given that they can. And if they don't, they will be in a worse case than Greece are. Because, okay, Germany is authoritarian and it's very powerful, but it's only 27% of the Eurozone economy. Whereas in the British Union, the Sterling Union, after Scottish independence, what's the percentage? 15 to 85. 15 is Scotland, 85 is England and Wales. Yeah? So you could never have monetary independence or any degree of say in the rate, the interest rate that should prevail in Glasgow, it will not be determined by the interest rate policies of the Bank of England. That's not independence. So work this one out, I say to my Scottish friends. Work out what you're going to do with your budget deficit, which will be quite large. Do you want, if you create a Scottish pound, do you want a hard Scottish pound, which means austerity? Or do you want to accept more inflation in order to avoid austerity? These are all decisions that you must make before you decide to embark upon the road of independence.
We'll do just a couple more. What time are you supposed to?
Well, let's take a couple more, because then I have another big lecture, so I might as well preserve some energy.
First, I guess go for it. Right. We talked about the disconnect between savings and investment, and the way I understood it, blamed the European Central Bank to some extent for that problem, and basically said
No, the charter of the European Central Bank.
Okay, right.
The rules.
Right, and basically said there's a lot of speculation, but that doesn't really create jobs. That doesn't really help lift people out of poverty, and has produced a lot of the problems that we're facing right now. Do you really think that's something that can be remedied, as we were saying, for instance, through more investment through the investment bank, or is it maybe also a sign that there has to be a different economic model for Europe to really create incentives for investors to invest stronger in Europe and help countries and help weaker countries sort of to create jobs again and be able to give their citizens prospects and future?
Look, the problem with any discussion beginning with we need a new model for Europe is people say, oh no. It's like that having a revolution, right? Whereas, of course, we need a new model for the world, not just for Europe. The one we have is particularly unappealing. But we need to be able to come up with policies that can be applied tomorrow morning to stabilize what we have, so that then we can start planning alternative ways of doing things, different social relations of production, different financial systems that are not bank-centric the way that they are in Europe. But that's for the medium and the long term. When you are, when the ship is sinking, you try to plug the hole, and you don't worry too much about the course that we're taking for the long term.
All right, we'll take a few more. Keep it short. Over there.
We talk about a lot of right-wing populism at the moment.
Can you repeat that?
We talk a lot about the moment, and we see a lot of, we can define it as right-wing populism, but what do you think we can have to learn from South American populism and that kind of more left? The left is kind of populism in those countries, and that comes from competition.
Well, there's a lot to learn from all sorts of different parts of the world and different movements. Good stuff and bad stuff. Positive lessons and negative lessons. So, what Correa did in Ecuador was splendid when he first took over, when he was first elected. He nationalized oil and unilaterally defaulted on the debt. That was brilliant. The problem I had was I didn't have anything to nationalize, except a lot of debt. So they were important experiences. The problem with Latin America and the rise of left movements, and I you know what, I just do not buy this label populism. This attempt to bundle together President Lula's political party with Le Pen in France is an abomination. They're, chalk and cheese. There is absolutely no connection between the Workers' Party in Brazil and the National Front in France. This attempt to brand them both populist. Anything that the establishment doesn't like is populist. It is politically noxious and analytically quite unhelpful, let me put it. But let me end this discussion on Latin America by simply saying that Latin America's fortunes and the fortunes of the popular left-wing movements can be summed up in one word: China. It was the great boost in exports to China that worked as the escalator that elevated all those countries up and allowed those governments to invest in poverty reduction in a spectacularly successful way, especially in Brazil. Yeah? And then look what happened once China started deflating. All those regimes became very stressed, and most of them fell.
All right, we'll take one last question. I think over there was
well, thanks for a very engaging talk, Yanis. The EU seems to rest on a sort of technocratic consensus that pooling sovereignty for economic purposes, amongst other things, is beneficial to all the nations. With the French and German elections coming up, that seems to be, this consensus seems to be at risk. And DiEM25 seems to be a great organisation, but is it too little too late? And if so, what happens next? Do we have this sort of crypto-fascism in Europe, or do we have some sort of EU phoenix rising from the ashes? What's the next step if this happens?
Well, allow me to say that, of course, it is a very interesting question. Is it too little too late? But it is not a question that should influence our decision about what we should be doing. Let me put it this way. There are two possibilities. One is that we are not past the point of no return, and we can save this thing by transforming it and making it sustainable and humane and all that. Then we should do it. There's the second possibility, that we are past the point of no return and it is too little too late, and the whole thing will collapse. Well, again, we think that what we're doing is the right thing. What are we doing? We are creating a transnational movement where we're holding hands together with Germans, with French, with Italian, with Portuguese people, with people here in Britain, and saying, look, this thing is collapsing, let's try to stop it from collapsing in a way which is beneficial to the masses. But if we fail, we still need to hold hands together in order to deal with the aftermath. So it is an interesting academic question, but it should not inform our political action.
Yeah, I think so if you have time for more questions, but I think as you want, it's up to you, honestly.
I think we can go.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and on behalf of the entire European Society, thank you, Yanis Varoufakis, to
thank you.
Speaking here.